There's something Father Gabriele Amorth confided in me privately, something that haunts me to this day, something he never wrote in his books, never mentioned in public interviews. He shared it only with me, because he knew I'd understand the gravity of his revelation. He said, "I've seen an exorcism fail so devastatingly that the victim was left in a worse state than any possession I'd witnessed in tens of thousands of cases. I'm going to tell you exactly what he revealed that afternoon, but I need you to understand something crucial before we continue. This information isn't for morbid curiosity. It's to protect you from one of the most dangerous mistakes a Catholic family can make when facing supernatural manifestations. Because according to Father Amorth's experience, there's something infinitely worse than living with a possession, living with the consequences of an exorcism gone terribly wrong. The story he told me happened in 1987, during what he considered one of the most intense periods of his ministry. He'd been called to a case outside Rome, a case that from the beginning showed extraordinary characteristics. A 35-year-old woman, a mother of 3, had begun manifesting symptoms that escalated with a speed that alarmed even an exorcist with decades of experience. I won't detail the specific manifestations because that's not the important part of this story. What matters is what happened when they tried to free her. Because that day, Father Amorth learned a lesson that would forever change his understanding of the hidden risks of the ministry of liberation. The first exorcism was performed following all established protocols. Father Amorth had meticulously prepared the ritual. He'd fasted for days, confessed and received communion that very morning. The bishop had given his formal authorization after a thorough investigation that ruled out medical or psychological causes. Everything seemed to indicate a severe but manageable case within his vast experience. However, something went wrong from the moment the initial prayer began. The resistance he encountered was unlike anything he'd experienced before. It wasn't the typical violent and dramatic resistance he knew well. It was something subtler, more intelligent, and more calculated. During the first 2 hours of the ritual, the woman alternated between periods of apparent cooperation and episodes of resistance that seemed to be testing the exorcist's limits. It was as if something was studying Father Amorth's methodology, learning his techniques, identifying weaknesses in his approach. And then something happened that he had never witnessed in thousands of previous exorcisms. Instead of progressively weakening under the power of the sacred prayers and rituals, the entity seemed to grow stronger. It not only resisted the most powerful invocations of the Roman ritual, but it began to respond with a knowledge of Catholic theology and doctrine that surpassed even the exorcist's own. It was at that moment, Father Amorth confided, that I realized I wasn't facing an ordinary possession. I was facing something that had specifically studied how to resist and counterattack exorcisms, something that had learned from previous failed exorcisms. After 6 hours of intense ritual, Father Amorth made the decision to suspend the exorcism. It was the first time in his career that he'd been forced to stop a ritual without successfully completing it. But his instinct told him that continuing under those circumstances could be more dangerous than beneficial. However, the damage was already done. In the weeks following the failed exorcism, the woman's condition not only didn't improve, but deteriorated in ways that defied all his previous experience. The manifestations became more frequent, more violent, and more intelligent. It was as if the exorcism attempt had provided a detailed map of the victim's spiritual vulnerabilities. What I witnessed afterward, Father Amorth told me with an expression I'll never forget, taught me that there are worse fates than possession. Because when an exorcism fails in a certain way, it doesn't simply return to the previous state. It can create something exponentially more devastating. The woman developed what Father Amorth came to call acquired supernatural resistance. It was as if the entity had developed immunity not only to the specific techniques he had used, but to entire categories of spiritual interventions. Prayers that had previously calmed her now agitated her. Sacred objects that had once soothed her now provoked violent reactions. But the most disturbing thing was how this acquired resistance spread beyond the original victim. Members of her family, who had previously only experienced minor side effects, began to manifest direct symptoms. It was as if the failed exorcism had created a kind of spiritual contagion, spreading through family connections. Over the next 6 months, Father Amorth tried multiple alternative approaches. He consulted with other experienced exorcists from across Europe. He modified rituals, changed times, used different sacred objects, even sought the intercession of special relics. Rarely used. Nothing worked. In fact, each attempt seemed to worsen the situation. That's when I understood a terrible truth, he confessed. Exorcisms aren't medical procedures where the worst possible outcome is that the treatment doesn't work. They are direct confrontations with intelligences that can learn, adapt, and counterattack. And when they fail, they can create situations infinitely worse than the original problem. Finally, after months of desperate research, Father Amorth discovered what had gone wrong in the original exorcism. The mistake hadn't been in the execution of the ritual itself, but in the prior assessment of the case. What he had diagnosed as a severe possession was actually something far more complex, a multiple infestation involving not one, but several different entities operating in coordination. The most dangerous mistake an exorcist can make, he explained, is to underestimate the complexity of what they're facing. When you attempt an exorcism designed for a single entity against a complex system of multiple entities, you don't just fail. You give them valuable information about your methods while confirming that you don't truly understand what you're fighting. This revelation led Father Amorth to develop far more rigorous evaluation protocols for future cases. But for the family who had suffered the consequences of their initial mistake, the damage was practically irreversible. It required years of collaborative work with multiple exorcists, utilizing techniques he had to specifically develop for cases of acquired resistance. The woman was eventually freed, he told me, but the cost was devastating. Her marriage didn't survive. 2 of her children developed severe psychological problems that persisted for years. And I learned that spiritual arrogance can be as dangerous as spiritual ignorance. This experience led Father Gabriele Amorth to a conclusion that fundamentally changed his approach to the ministry of liberation. There are cases where attempting an exorcism without absolute preparation is more dangerous than not attempting it at all. He explained that he had identified 5 specific categories of situations where exorcisms have a high probability of failing catastrophically, and how families can recognize these situations before seeking inadequate help. First dangerous category: cases where multiple members of the family manifest symptoms simultaneously, but with different patterns. This almost always indicates a multiple or systemic infestation, requiring specialized approaches that most exorcists don't master. When I see a family where the father has nightmares, the mother hears voices, and the children exhibit inexplicable aggressive behaviors, I immediately know we're dealing with something far more complex than individual possession, he explained. Attempting a traditional exorcism in these cases is like using antibiotics for a single bacterium when there's actually a systemic infection with multiple resistant organisms. The common mistake is treating each symptom as a manifestation of the same entity affecting different people. In reality, Amorth discovered. They are often different entities that have established a coordinated network of influence. Each requires a specific approach, and attempting a generic exorcism can alert the entire system without effectively neutralizing any component. Second dangerous category: cases where the victim demonstrates specific knowledge about exorcism rituals, advanced Catholic doctrine, or details about other possession cases. This indicates that the entity has been specifically studying how to resist spiritual interventions. I remember another case where the victim started correcting my Latin during the ritual, Amorth told me. Not only did she know the prayers better than I did, but she knew exactly what modifications to make to neutralize their effectiveness. It was like facing an enemy who had memorized all my moves before the battle. These educated entities are infinitely more dangerous because they can anticipate and counterattack every standard technique. They require completely unconventional methods that many exorcists don't know. Attempting a traditional exorcism is like telegraphing your moves to an opponent who already knows all your strategies. Third dangerous category: cases where previous attempts at liberation have been made by unqualified individuals. Each failed attempt provides valuable information to the entities while strengthening them with the wasted spiritual energy of the ritual. I've seen cases devastated by self-proclaimed exorcists who attempted rituals they found on the internet, Amorth told me with visible frustration. Each poorly executed attempt not only fails, but trains the entity to resist future interventions. It's like giving it vaccines against your own weapons. The problem is that many desperate families seek help from any source before consulting qualified ecclesiastical authorities. By the time they reach a real exorcist, the entity has already developed immunity to multiple standard techniques. Fourth dangerous category: cases where the victim or the family have been consciously involved in occult practices, even if it was in the distant past. These connections create access channels that can be reactivated during an exorcism, bringing unexpected reinforcements. I had a case where the victim had experimented with Ouija boards 20 years earlier, Amorth explained. During the exorcism, those dormant connections were reactivated, and suddenly I was facing not one, but 5 different entities that had been waiting for exactly that opportunity. These previous occult connections act as backdoors that can open under the spiritual pressure of an exorcism, exponentially complicating the situation. Fifth dangerous category: cases where the exorcist himself is not in an optimal spiritual state or has secret doubts about his authority or effectiveness. Entities can detect spiritual insecurity and exploit those weaknesses to turn the ritual against the exorcist. An exorcism is not a technical procedure that works automatically if you follow the correct steps, Amorth emphasized. It's a direct spiritual battle where your faith, your purity of intention, and your trust in the authority of Christ are your only real weapons. If you have doubts or unconfessed sin, you're fighting with compromised armor. He told me about exorcists who had been counterattacked during rituals, developing their own symptoms of negative influence that persisted for months. I've seen colleagues attempt exorcisms when they weren't spiritually prepared and ended up needing liberation themselves. After sharing these dangerous categories, Father Amorth explained the specific signs that indicate when a situation may be too complex for a standard exorcism, and why it's crucial to recognize these signs before seeking inadequate help. First, sign of extreme complexity: when the symptoms follow precise cyclical patterns that correspond to specific dates on the liturgical calendar or important family events. This indicates long-term strategic planning that requires exhaustive analysis before any intervention. Manifestations that intensify specifically during Holy Week or that appear exclusively on the anniversaries of family deaths are not coincidences, he explained. They are indicators that you are facing an intelligence that has specifically studied how to maximize psychological and spiritual harm. Second sign, when the manifestations include information that the victim could not naturally know about specific people in their life, especially intimate details about the unconfessed sins of close relatives. This indicates access to levels of information that suggest complex spiritual connections. Third sign, when sacred objects not only fail to help, but actually provoke increasingly violent reactions with each exposure. This can indicate that the entities are developing acquired resistance in real time. If a crucifix that initially calmed the victim a week later violently agitates them, that tells me I'm dealing with something that's adapting and growing stronger, Father Amorth explained to me. Continuing the same approach in such cases is dangerously counterproductive. Fourth sign, when the victim demonstrates periods of complete lucidity, where they can rationally discuss their condition, but describe internal sensations suggesting multiple presences, with distinct personalities operating simultaneously. This almost always confirms multiple infestation. I remember a victim who described with perfect clarity how she felt 3 different voices arguing in her head about how to resist the prayers, Father Amorth recounted. That description immediately alerted me that I wasn't facing a simple entity, but a consortium of coordinated entities. Fifth sign, when the manifestations extend beyond the primary victim and include specific technological phenomena that seem intelligent or targeted, electronic equipment failing selectively, recordings distorting only during religious content. Phone calls interfered with when spiritual topics are discussed. The more sophisticated entities have learned to manipulate technology in ways that suggest an advanced understanding of modern human vulnerabilities, he explained. When I see intelligent technological patterns, I know I'm facing something that has specifically studied how to operate in the contemporary world. After identifying these signs of extreme complexity, Father Amorth developed what he called a pre-exorcism risk assessment protocol. This protocol is specifically designed to avoid the catastrophic errors that can turn a difficult situation into an irreversible tragedy. The most important lesson I learned from my failures, he confided, is that spiritual humility is not weakness, it's wisdom. Recognizing when a case is beyond your capabilities isn't admitting defeat. It's protecting the victim from devastating consequences. Element 1 of the protocol, a mandatory observation and documentation period of at least 4 weeks before any direct intervention. During this time, all symptoms, patterns, timings, and triggers are meticulously recorded, specifically looking for the signs of complexity we've discussed. I will never again attempt an exorcism without fully understanding the specific nature of what I'm facing, he told me. That observation period has saved countless victims from the mistakes I made in my early years. Element 2, mandatory consultation with at least 2 experienced exorcists who can review the documentation and offer alternative perspectives on the case's complexity. No exorcist, no matter their experience, should attempt complex cases in isolation. My arrogance almost destroyed that family in 1987, he confessed. I thought my experience was sufficient for any case. I learned that there are situations where collaboration isn't optional. It's essential to avoid tragedies. Element 3. Specific assessment of the exorcist's own spiritual state, including thorough confession, a period of fasting and intensified prayer, and honest self-evaluation of their motivations and emotional preparedness for the specific case. An exorcist with unresolved spiritual issues is a danger to themselves and to the victims, he explained. I've seen cases where the exorcist's compromised spiritual condition not only caused the ritual to fail, but transferred additional spiritual problems to the victim. Element 4. Development of a detailed contingency plan for failure scenarios, including specific protocols for suspending the exorcism if signs emerge that the situation is deteriorating instead of improving. Before beginning any exorcism, I now establish specific criteria that will force me to stop the ritual if they appear, he said. Having an exit plan isn't planning for failure, it's planning to protect the victim from catastrophic failures. But beyond these protocols for exorcists, Father Amorth shared crucial information that every Catholic family needs to know: how to recognize when they're in danger of seeking inadequate help that could devastatingly worsen their situation. Desperate families frequently make decisions that, while understandable, can turn manageable problems into irreversible tragedies, he explained. My responsibility is to ensure they know the risks before they make mistakes I've seen destroy entire families. First, devastating risk: seeking help from self-proclaimed exorcists who lack official authorization from the Catholic Church. These individuals frequently utilize unorthodox methods that can open additional spiritual vulnerabilities while providing a false sense of progress. I've documented cases where families who sought help from healers, shamans, or independent exorcists ended up with exponentially worse situations, he recounted. These unorthodox methods not only fail to resolve the original problem, but frequently create additional access points for negative influences. The problem is that these unorthodox practitioners often promise quick and dramatic results, which is extremely appealing to desperate families. But according to Amorth's experience, any solution that promises immediate results in cases of supernatural manifestations is almost certainly fraudulent or dangerously inadequate. Second risk: attempting liberation rituals found on the internet or in popular books without the supervision of qualified ecclesiastical authority. These rituals are frequently simplified or distorted versions of procedures that require specific training and official authorization. I constantly receive families who have worsened their situation by attempting home exorcisms based on information they found online, he explained with visible frustration. These amateur rituals are not only ineffective, but can act as provocations that intensify the manifestations. He explained that authentic exorcism rituals are not simply prayers or procedures that anyone can perform. They require specific spiritual authority that is granted through priestly ordination and specialized training. Attempting these rituals without proper authorization is like trying brain surgery after reading a medical textbook. It's reckless, dangerous, potentially fatal. Third risk: seeking multiple second opinions from different practitioners without coordination. This can create a conflict of methodologies. It confuses the situation while exposing the family to potentially contradictory approaches. I've seen families who simultaneously consulted Catholic priests, Protestant pastors, psychiatrists, and New Age practitioners, Father Gabriele Amorth told me. Each had a different approach, and the combination of conflicting methodologies created spiritual chaos, dramatically worsening the original situation. According to Amorth, when a family faces supernatural manifestations, they should choose a specific methodology and follow it consistently under qualified supervision. Instead of experimenting with multiple approaches simultaneously, this is crucial. Fourth risk: postponing the search for official help while experimenting with home remedies, allowing the situation to deteriorate to points where effective intervention becomes exponentially more difficult. I frequently receive families who have been dealing with manifestations for years, trying everything except seeking appropriate ecclesiastical help, he explained. By the time they finally come to me, the situation has become so deeply entrenched that it requires years of intense work, instead of the weeks or months it would have originally required. He explained that supernatural manifestations like certain diseases become progressively harder to treat the longer they are allowed to develop without proper intervention. What could be resolved in weeks in the early stages may require years of specialized work in advanced stages. After sharing these risks, Father Amorth explained the specific protocol families should follow when they suspect they are facing supernatural manifestations. It's designed to avoid the mistakes that can lead to catastrophic failures. Step 1. Meticulous documentation of all symptoms and manifestations for at least 2 weeks, including specific times, triggers, and observable patterns. This documentation is essential for proper evaluation by qualified authorities. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of detailed documentation, he told me. I need to understand exactly what is happening, when, and under what circumstances before I can determine the appropriate approach. Step 2. Initial consultation with the local parish priest, who can provide a preliminary assessment and, if necessary, a referral to specialized diocesan resources. This step is crucial because it establishes official ecclesiastical supervision from the beginning. Many situations that families interpret as supernatural can be resolved with appropriate pastoral counseling or simple spiritual interventions, he explained. The local parish priest can often provide perspective that avoids the need for more extreme measures. Step 3. If the parish priest determines that the situation requires specialized evaluation, seek an official referral to an authorized diocesan exorcist. Absolutely avoid any shortcuts or unofficial practitioners. The temptation to seek quicker help from unofficial sources is understandable. But that's exactly where families make mistakes that can be irreversible, he warned me. Step 4. During the period of official evaluation, maintain simple but consistent spiritual protection routines. Daily family prayer, regular mass attendance, appropriate use of sacred objects, and absolute avoidance of anything that could exacerbate the situation. Families often want to do something while waiting for official help, he explained. But in these cases, doing too much can be more dangerous than doing too little. Simple consistency is safer than risky experimentation. But perhaps the most important lesson Father Amorth wanted me to share is the crucial difference between urgency and emergency in situations of supernatural manifestations. Families often feel they are in an immediate emergency requiring instantaneous, dramatic action, he explained. But in my experience, true spiritual emergencies are extremely rare. Most situations are urgent, but not emergencies, and that distinction is crucial to avoid desperate decisions that make things worse. According to Amorth, true spiritual emergencies requiring immediate intervention only include situations where there is an immediate risk of severe physical harm to the victim or family members. In these extreme cases, the family should immediately contact diocesan authorities while seeking appropriate medical or police protection. But the vast majority of cases, even those with dramatic manifestations, fall into the category of urgent but not emergencies, where taking time for proper evaluation and careful planning is safer than hasty action. I've seen more families destroyed by premature action than by delayed action, he confessed. Strategic patience is often the difference between successful resolution and irreversible tragedy. Finally, Father Amorth shared his most personal reflection on the lessons learned from his most devastating failures. For decades, I focused on developing spiritual power and authority to confront evil, he told me. but my most significant failures taught me that spiritual wisdom, knowing when not to act, is equally crucial. The most dangerous exorcist is not the one who lacks power, but the one who lacks the humility to recognize his limitations. He explained that after the failed case of 1987, he implemented a personal practice of praying specifically for humility before each case, asking for the grace to recognize situations that are beyond his individual capabilities. The temptation of the experienced exorcist is to believe that past success guarantees future success, he confessed. But each case is unique, and experience can become arrogance if not balanced with constant humility. This learned humility led Amorth to develop a practice of consulting with colleagues in complex cases. Even after decades of successful experience, no exorcist should work in complete isolation, especially in cases that present unfamiliar characteristics. He also developed a practice of spiritual post-mortem after each case, analyzing not only what worked, but what could have worked better and what signs might have indicated alternative approaches. Every failure contains lessons that can prevent future tragedies, he explained. My responsibility isn't just to the families I've helped, but to those I can help in the future by learning from past mistakes. The last thing Father Gabriele Amorth asked me to emphasize is that sharing this information shouldn't create paralyzing fear in families facing difficult situations. My goal isn't to discourage families from seeking help when they need it, he explained. It's to make sure they seek the right help in the right way, avoiding mistakes that can turn manageable problems into irreversible tragedies. He reminded me that the vast majority of cases involving supernatural manifestations, when handled properly, with patience and wisdom, are resolved successfully without lasting consequences. The catastrophic failures I've witnessed resulted from avoidable errors, he told me. Inadequate assessment, insufficient preparation, spiritual arrogance, or seeking inappropriate help. Families who follow proper protocols and seek qualified official help have a very high probability of successful resolution. But proper preparation and strategic patience are absolutely essential. The difference between success and catastrophic failure often comes down to taking enough time to fully understand the situation before acting. Father Amorth concluded our conversation with a prayer he'd developed specifically for families facing supernatural manifestations, designed to provide protection during the assessment period, while avoiding rash actions that could worsen the situation. Lord Jesus Christ, conqueror of all evil, in your mercy protect this family as we seek to understand your will for our situation. Grant us patience to seek appropriate help, wisdom to avoid rash decisions, and humility to recognize our limitations. Protect us from all evil as we await your deliverance, in your perfect time, and in the way you choose. We trust not in our own strength, but in your infinite power and perfect love. Amen. This prayer, he explained, acknowledges the reality of spiritual warfare while avoiding the temptation to take premature action that could be counterproductive. The knowledge I've shared with you today isn't meant to create fear, but to protect you from mistakes that could turn a difficult situation into an irreversible tragedy. If your family is facing manifestations you suspect might be supernatural, you now know how to proceed in a way that maximizes the chances of successful resolution while minimizing the risks of catastrophic failure. The difference between families who emerge stronger from these crises and those who are destroyed by them often boils down to wisdom, knowing what to do, when to do it, and equally important, what not to do, and when not to do it. Father Amorth dedicated the final years of his life to ensuring that the lessons learned from his most devastating failures didn't die with him. Now those lessons are in your hands. Use them wisely.